Hey guys, welcome back to Star Map. So in our previous video, my brother Max and I opened up a whole can of worms with that Death Star embryo analysis. Now I know that was probably a lot and might have come out of left field for some people, although if you've been with this channel for a while, you know that I like to take a more analytical approach to Star Wars. I wanted to take a step back and take a broader look at many aspects of George's 6 films through that sort of lens. And there's one gentleman on Twitter whose handle is Gatekeeper1138, whose current name is Dr. D, and a couple years ago, I follow him, he's part of the Star Wars community, and a couple years ago he had a really great tweet that perfectly encapsulated both why I love Star Wars and my issues with its current state. So let me read that tweet for you. Anakin and Padme were inspired by Tristan and Isolde, the fall of Odysseus, and elements of the Bible. Luke was inspired by Arthur and the Sword and the Stone, but modern Star Wars is inspired by itself. George took great tales of old and the relevant morals, then applied them to a sci-fi setting, using the cultures and aesthetics of both ancient and modern times to create a truly unique world. There it is, folks. That's the secret formula to making actual Star Wars. Filoni tries too hard to mirror George, not what inspired George to begin with. That's what makes his work cheap and unoriginal. A good student doesn't simply copy their teacher's answers. Instead, the student learns the teacher's methods and uses them to find the answer to a different sum. I could not have said that nearly as well myself. I was so happy to find that tweet, and I started talking with him, and I asked him to come on, and basically we had a long discussion about sort of our thoughts and our feelings towards what made George's 6 films so good. So the first question I asked him was about Anakin's character, the many literary elements that made up his character and what makes him such a compelling guy. So listen to his answer, and we have a great discussion.
You look at Star Wars, you look at the tales that George Lucas was trying to tell, and the through line through it all is that it's about love. Because you look at the original trilogy, and it's about how love can inspire you to become more and become greater and find your place in the world and do the things that you wouldn't necessarily see yourself doing. Whereas the prequels, it's all about how you can go off the rails if you let love control you, and which is what happens to Anakin. And then you look at Rey as an example, like going forward from that. What is her point? What is the point of her arc? Because it feels like at one point it's trying to say, oh well, it's not family that matters, it's you. But then on the other hand, it goes into the, oh well, family matters and it will be your legacy that matters. So there's like a disconnect though, like a logical disconnect, because it's like the story can't bring itself together to tell one story. Like, and that's how the trilogy is supposed to be. I mean, Star Wars is a saga. You're not meant to view them as independent films. You're meant to view them as all one long story, as George Lucas has said multiple times. You want to talk about like all the different things that inspired Star Wars, and it's a difficult one because there are so many things that inspired the original trilogy and the prequels that you can't really pin it down to one thing. It's like, as a good example, I mean, yeah, Anakin is a perfect example because he's multiple characters. He's Odysseus, he's Tristan, he's Romeo, and in some elements he's also, obviously, like you've referenced before, he's Brutus, but then he's he can be seen as Octavian as well in that story, and Cain from the Bible, because Anakin and Obi-Wan is like Cain and Abel. With Tristan and Isolde, the story is obviously that Tristan is a noble knight who his mission is to escort the king's betrothed to him, but then they fall in love along the way, in much how Anakin is tasked with escorting and protecting Padme, and they fall in love along the way. However, with Tristan and Isolde, it's a love potion that basically makes them fall in love, whereas with Anakin and Padme, it's much more like Romeo and Juliet in how their love comes about, because they're on opposite sides of the spectrum in terms of politics, because you've got the Jedi and the Senate who are opposing factions. So obviously Anakin's not allowed his emotional attachments. Padme, if she was found to be sleeping with a Jedi, it would cause a scandal for both of them. Going back to Odysseus, which is what I referenced first, but with Odysseus, it comes down to his return. It's more about the final act of Odysseus, how he returns from the war and he seeks to be reunited with his family. But during that, he also has meetings with his father, and that causes him to sort of like have a bit of lost faith in the people around him, which is what Palpatine was always doing, you know, manipulating Anakin so that he could become more sort of like under his sway, so that he could turn him against the Jedi. So if you look at the Jedi Order as God, Cain and Abel obviously brothers, Abel being the shepherd, Cain being the farmer. Cain grew jealous of Abel because Abel's offerings seemed to appease God more than his own. So Cain ended up becoming jealous and bitter towards his brother, and that's why he killed him in the end. Which is more sort of like, which is explored in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith with Anakin, how he sort of like, he feels like he's being sort of like excluded from the Jedi.
It's all Obi-Wan's fault. He's jealous. He's holding me back.
He feels as though they're afraid of his power, but at the same time, they're more sort of like accepting of Obi-Wan, even though they've gone through a lot of the same stuff and accomplished many of the same things. Yeah, obviously Obi-Wan stays with the Jedi, Anakin leaves the Jedi. But yeah, so with Cain and Abel, it comes down to obviously Anakin fitting the role of Cain, being the one who would seek to slay his brother. But obviously, as we know, things don't turn out that way.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right on all those fronts. Yeah, that's great. I think what I would add to that is the theme of faith. I was actually, just before this, I was reading through an interview with George Lucas in 1999. It was obviously tied to The Phantom Menace, but they talked about a lot of things, and he was discussing what an important role faith plays in Star Wars as a whole. And
yeah,
it was a lot of and everyone knows this, but a lot of reference to Christianity and God and everything. He was basically saying that, the Force is God, and so when you say may the Force be with you, it's may the Lord be with you. Essentially, it's right there. And
yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, go on.
No, yeah, you're good. And then George was talking about how Luke's journey is all about maintaining faith, and when they say things like use the Force or your connection with the Force, that's simply the purpose. This is straight from George. He says that's all a reference just to maintaining your faith, and Luke does represent that, like that hope in the darkest time, because he has a very, very strong faith through the whole thing. And
Absolutely.
then one thing you mentioned about Darth Maul that I loved, because I thought the exact same thing. And again, it's right there, but it's nice to kind of point these things out directly. He said he wanted to find something or create something that looked essentially like a demon or a devil from the Bible, and that's why he has the horns and the red and the black. But he said he wanted to give it a human face because Maul represents like that evil that we have in all of us. But yeah, there were so many ties to Christianity, and that was absolutely right. Now on my point about the whole Mace Windu Caesar thing, all these things you're totally correct. Odysseus, Cain and Abel, you're totally right. Now it's the themes and the sort of eternal truths in these works that we're pointing to. They don't need to literally play out exactly like the plot, right? So you said you're totally right. Anakin is both. Anakin and Padme are both Tristan and Isolde and Romeo and Juliet, and we have the same theme there of forbidden love, right? So we kind of take pieces from each that adds to that core theme. Now, same with the fall of Rome and Caesar. In episode 1, we see that Palpatine is a very respected. He's still a chancellor at that time, right? Respected chancellor, and Senator, thank you. He's a very respected senator. Everyone loves him, but he doesn't like the other senators, and that's something that was true about Caesar. He did a lot of stuff that was for the people, but against what the senators wanted. But that's kind of what grew him in popularity, and then he got kind of full of himself, and then here we go. So this is a painting by I'll put it in the description who painted it. But one of the things about the attempted assassination, if you want to call it, of Palpatine, that always made me think, oh, this is like Caesar, is it looks like that final section when he's up against the windowsill and everything, it looks like a stage play, the way they're positioned. If you imagine the audience is like looking through the window, it all looks like a play. And so here we have a beautiful depiction, a painting of Caesar getting killed, and then juxtaposing that with Mace, pushing Palpatine against the window there. You can kind of see the similarity just visually. So I think on a subconscious level, I was like, oh, this is definitely that. But looking at it more literally and thinking about it more literally, yeah, you're right. Anakin would be the friend to Caesar, and if we say Caesar is Palpatine, then that makes sense. And the only difference is, Anakin doesn't go through with it. He has an intention of doing so. He tells Mace Windu and everything, and Mace Windu would be, I guess, Mark Antony. But the alternative version here is that Brutus decides not to go through with it, and in fact spoils the whole assassination. But the effect is still the same, because then we have the creation of the Empire and the Civil War, which is also what happened. So it's not a one-to-one thing, but it's definitely there. Just again, visually, thematically, it's all right there.
Well, I think when you mentioned the idea of it looking like a play, I think that's very important, because you look at the way the prequels are written and shot and directed and everything, they are heavily inspired by Shakespeare. And Shakespeare had the fall of Caesar in a play. And I think that is what inspired that scene in all of Revenge of the Sith, mostly. That significant play by Shakespeare, specifically, not specifically the entire history of Caesar, but that one play, because it is purely about the assassination. And as I said, Lucas took a lot of stuff from Shakespeare, to sort of like pan out the prequels, because it was like the Renaissance of the Republic, in much how Shakespeare existed during the Renaissance of England. So you get this idea that Anakin is Brutus, like you said. But I think in certain aspects you could see both Windu and Palpatine as Caesar at the same time, because when Anakin turns on Windu, he basically becomes Caesar in that moment.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
Because obviously it allows Palpatine to strike. And I'm just gonna make this point. I think that if Windu doesn't die in that moment, everything falls apart in terms of what Lucas was trying to establish. So, Windu needs to be dead.
Yeah.
Like, when he falls out of that window, he needs to die.
Absolutely.
Otherwise,
no, I fully agree.
Yeah. Because I know a lot of people like to say, "Oh, he lived in this, that, and the other," but it kind of kills the point of it, and it diminishes Palpatine and Anakin's moment by having Windu survive.
For sure.
But yeah.
And I think I don't know how you feel about this stuff, but yeah, I mean the idea that so and so survived is most people are on board with the fact that it's too much in Star Wars, and I disagree with the fact that Maul lived. It's like he should be dead, I think, and then Mace Windu, yeah, you're right, needs to die, because thematically it represents so much. His death has so much weight to it. It's that really, his death defines to me the movement from the prequels to the originals. The movement from the Republic to the Empire. It's like boom, it's right there. So yeah, if he lives, it pulls so much out of the gravity of that. I don't know. There's speculation also, that he lived, but that's so lame.
Yeah, it would also deviate from Windu's character entirely, just to go into hiding and never do anything.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Like even after the fact, like even if it was like say like a year or two. I mean, I personally, if I was doing it, I wouldn't have had Windu die there per se. If you were going to have Windu survive, I'd have him survive in the film, and he's the one who sort of like takes he takes the bullet for Yoda during the Senate fight.
Yeah,
that's how I would do it if you were going to have Windu to live. That's the only way. But anything other than that, no.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. The other thing when I was reading about Caesar, just a brief aside that I thought was kind of cool, is that he was known for, when he spoke, he was on this really tall podium. I sent you a picture that was like 11 feet high, and they call it a platform. So immediately I thought of the floating platforms in the Senate chamber, and whenever we see Palpatine, he's in the center above everyone. So I feel like there might be something to that as well. All these little things, the visuals are so important.
And then obviously it's very circular as well, the Senate, which again Roman Senates were, and it's something that's echoed through even to into the American Senate. Like the Senate, like it's all circular, so then everybody's sort of like at a certain, like there's no with it being like
a round table type vibe, yeah.
Sort of like, yeah, exactly. So everybody's at an equal footing, in that respect. But yeah, I mean, with Palpatine being Caesar, I mean, you look at Caesar, how he sort of like rejected the crown over and over because he was hoping that the people would sort of like revolt against that and basically will him into accepting it, because then he could be seen as the reluctant leader, which is exactly what Palpatine does with the emergency powers. When Jar Jar bestows them upon him, he's like, it is with great reluctance that I accept these powers.
Yeah.
Because he wants to be seen as, the reluctant hero.
Yeah, you're totally right, man. Wow. I think I was so I was so into that Twitter post you made a while back, because you're able to more eloquently state the things that I'm feeling, like you're doing right now. Again, like in my mind's eye, I know that this is true, but I don't have maybe the knowledge or just the words to explain it correctly. But you were right on the money with all that, so that's fantastic, man.
Yes.
And then one really cool thing that I found in an explanation about Tristan and Isolde that I just want to add is this little blurb I put down here. I'll read it. So in the novel of Tristan and Isolde, it's insinuated that tuberculosis kills her at the end there, and then she just happens to die, like, at the right time, I think. But in the Wagner opera, we don't know any of that. We're not told any of that. So I just wanted to read this blurb explaining the ending here. It's also, while Tristan and Isolde are spending their last moments, or at least those in the world, we know that Isolde's soprano voice is heard singing 𝘊𝘆𝘈𝘕𝘛𝘌𝘙, I can't pronounce that, love is dead. Isolde, ever a lovely lady of passion, with bright hair crimson flowing down the length of her body, and with sadness to heighten her beauty, and even beyond what we had seen, sings a haunting melody of love. She starts to slowly die with Tristan. The music increases in tension of romance and sacrifice to love. Yet not being clear what exactly is causing... Okay, this is the part. It not being clear exactly what is causing Isolde to die yet, it is as if it did not matter, for it might simply be the lack of will to live. Isn't that crazy? That's just that little blurb there. It is not even being clear what exactly is causing Isolde to die yet. It is as if it does not matter, for it might simply be the lack of will to live without Tristan. So, and that's exactly what they say in the movie. She might, it seems as if she has the lack of will to live. That's exactly what they say. So as I was reading that little blurb about just the ending there, I was like, whoa, like that's exactly what happens to Padme. And people make fun of that, but there it is. I think there's sort of the source material, if you want to call it that.
There's also another sort of like twist in the whole story as well, because depending on what version you read, more modernized versions of the story talk about the love potion distinctly, and that it only lasts for 3 years, as opposed to the original where it lasts indefinitely. And if you look at Anakin and Padme's marriage, and over the course of the Clone Wars, it's roughly about 3 years, which is a nice little notch to sort of like think about, because then it reinforces the idea that it is Tristan and Isolde that are the inspiration.
Yeah. Wow, you're totally right. Yeah, those little specific nuggets really tie it all together.
The little details really matter.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of confirms your suspicions. Now, I wanted to mention, because my brother Max was the one who mentioned that crazy thing about the Death Star before, and he had a couple new theories. Well, he and some folks actually who commented on that video. So the first one was, I was trying to find it this morning. I really was looking my hardest. I couldn't find it. Hopefully, if I can find it, soon, I'll link it below. But Max was saying there was an interview with Lucas, or it was just him talking about certain aspects of Star Wars, and he got on this thing about how important breath and breathing is, and how it essentially represents life. Like the breath of life. And so Max's theory, if I can just speak for him on this, is that he thinks when so first of all, Darth Vader is kept alive with this machine. He's like in an iron lung, essentially, and it's keeping him breathing. And George, actually, he mentioned this in the 1999 interview, too, that because he's being sort of kept afloat with machinery, he's seen as being less human. And then he mirrors that, obviously, with Grievous being in even worse condition. Grievous has less of himself left biologically, and he can't even breathe correctly. He has this cough, and there's we can point to specifically why in the old cartoon Mace Windu force grabs his lungs or whatever, but I think the thematic purpose for his cough is that he's closer to death. Like he doesn't even have healthy even breathing anymore. He's always sickly. There's less of him there. He's like Darth Vader, but even more so in the aspect of that machinery keeping him alive. Now
it's more like an existence, just an existence rather than a life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Max's theory is that when you're force choking someone, you're taking their life force, and that's what he thinks. And I guess if you want to call it his headcanon, that's what he thinks killed Padme. When Anakin starts force choking her, it represents him like taking her life force. So I just thought that was interesting, the idea of breath representing life in Star Wars, and needing an exterior source to maintain that breath is sort of representative of you being this, this Frankenstein monster. And then the force choke thing is really interesting, that, other than literally just choking them so they can't breathe, you're sort of draining their essence, almost like with the Dementors from Harry Potter or something, how they're the ones that take that little orb out of your mouth, which is sort of your breath of life, right? So it's just interesting stuff to think about visually. And then the last the craziest thing, someone in the comments on our Death Star embryo video, all he said was, he said, look at the way Anakin kneels to Sidious, and he was referring to the scene right after Mace Windu was killed, when Anakin pledges himself. And I didn't know what he was talking about, but Max instantly was like, he responded, he was like, oh, you're right, dang. And then I texted Max, I was like, what is he talking about? And so long story short, we rewatched the scene together, and I'll throw it up here, just the visuals. Which is tough because the sound is also really important. The dynamic in that scene is obviously, Anakin is giving himself to Sidious. Sidious is very dominant in that scene, and Anakin is very submissive, right? So you gotta bear with me on this one. I think you might know where I'm going with it.
I know where you're going.
Yeah.
Into bloody Harvey Weinstein territory.
Exactly.
And this is why I remain anonymous.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's crazy when you do look at the scene. There's a specific moment. I'm gonna try not to use the words. There's a specific moment where Anakin is already kneeling in front of him, but then he tilts his head downward. Right when he tilts his head downward, it cuts to a shot where we see Sidious like full frontal, and then Anakin's bowing right before him. We see the back of Anakin's head directly. Anakin's head tips down. And then Sidious lets out all these grunts and groans. He's not even speaking. There's like a couple seconds there where he's just going.
I was gonna say it's like a euphoric sort of like inward breath.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah, that was really good. Yeah.
Thank you. Because you get that. I mean, it's almost like. If you were to take it more from that and apply it to sort of like the Force itself, it's almost like he's absorbing the sort of like the shift in the Force that's happened because of Windu's death.
Yeah.
At the same time, not obviously there's the whole side of Anakin giving himself over to Palpatine, and that is symbolized through basically being on his knees doing the deed, but you don't see it.
Exactly. And right after that's a good way of putting it. Right after he does the deed, that's when Sidious is like, okay, you're Darth Vader now. He immediately is like, henceforth you shall be known as Darth Vader. And he says a bunch of other like really obviously charged stuff, like the Force is strong in you, and he's saying it all like, And then we analyzed it maybe a little too closely, but one really funny thing to notice is that as Sidious is walking away, he's like fiddling with his belt. He adjusts his belt, and then he puts his robes back on, and then he sits down. So it's like it's crazy. This is like some deep level stuff. I don't even know if I'm on board with it fully because it's just so out there. But
yeah, I think there's obviously like you said, you can read too much into things, but when there are so many things that align, you've got to think, because obviously someone's intentionally done that. Someone's intentionally we don't know how much George directed Ian in that scene. We don't know how much of Ian was just like, I'm going to do this because I know the role. And we know that George did trust Ian with the role, that he didn't need to give him much direction. But at the same time, George being the very sort of like methodical person he was when it came to his directing, he probably went to Ian and said, well, when you're walking over to your chair, just do this.
Yeah. I've noticed, and you've probably seen a lot of behind the scenes stuff too. George will, if he wants something, he'll step in and just do it. Like I've seen him direct
course.
Hayden Christensen. He'll be like, I want you to turn your head away or something. So like he doesn't tell him why, obviously, but he just steps in and is like, and he just says, do this. So he might have done that. We don't know. But yeah, that part of it is crazy. And if you want to go back to like the Greek and Roman inspirations, we know that one of the if you took a mentor, one of the things that happened was you had to engage with them in that way, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's like it correlates pretty directly.
I mean, if you go back to that culture in general, like I know there's going to be a lot of diehard Christians who don't like this, but back in the days of like the Roman Empire and the Greeks, like it was more sort of like in terms of culture and in terms of social standing, it was more sort of like preferable to be seen with another man because of what that brought. Because obviously, women were obviously in sort of like a lower class to the men. So if you were seen with a man and having a man do those actions on you, it was more like it was to say you are powerful.
Yeah. Wow.
I mean, it was widely known. I mean, if you've ever watched the series Spartacus, that depicts it very well. I mean, you'll just have like, you'll have two bloody Roman diplomats talking in a bath, and meanwhile you just got some bloody Roman servant noshing them off.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. So, and it's interesting because Star Wars is Christian, but it's also very ancient Rome, ancient Greece, if you want to call it that. It's almost so many things at once, but it does it so elegantly. I can't think of anything else that like tries to do so many things but pulls it off. Star Wars does that. It also just in if you want to pull back from all that jazz for a second, also in terms of genre, like it's kind of like a western, but it's also almost like in a way like a war drama, but then it's also like sort of an old samurai movie. It's so many different eras combined and different aspects of history combined, but it does it in a way that makes sense. And it's funny to think about it because Star Wars is like distant galaxy, crazy different planets that don't exist, aliens, all that. It seems not rooted in our history, but it is more than most fantasy for sure. I think it might be the piece of large scale fantasy that is absolutely by far the most rooted in real world history in a lot of different ways.
So I think the way I've always looked at it is that with Star Wars, it adhered to very archetypical storytelling. So obviously there are certain archetypes of storytelling, like Sword in the Stone, the Forbidden Romance, etc., which Star Wars, they're kind of like the main two. But then it's the themes as well, like tragedy, family, hope, this, like those kind of themes. They're very sort of like embroiled in classic literature. Like most classic literature tells a tale of tragedy. And when you keep bringing that in, like all these different story archetypes, then it becomes more sort of like comparable to real history. And I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of people get so captivated by it and end up almost talking about it like it is real history to a degree, because it is a retelling of certain things.
You're right. You just blew my mind with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because if you compare it to something like Lord of the Rings, like Tolkien's world, Tolkien did certain storytelling tropes, but he didn't at the same time, because he wasn't like a studied writer or anything like that. So when he went to get Lord of the Rings published, or even The Hobbit, when he went to get them published, the publishers said, this isn't set out like like a regular story. This isn't going to work. So initially they rejected it. But when you look at it on closer inspection, on the outside, it doesn't look like it follows certain archetypes, but it does. But what they've done is they're broken down to different levels, and different aspects of archetypes are assigned to different characters. Because if you look at, if you were to look at King Arthur, Arthurian myth in general, Lord of the Rings attaches very closely to that, because you could argue that Frodo is Arthur, and then Gandalf is Merlin. The ring itself is the sword, and you compare that to Star Wars because you can mirror it through. Luke is Frodo, Obi-Wan is Gandalf, Sam is 3PO, and then the ring itself is R2, because obviously R2 carries the technical readouts to the Death Star. He's basically the MacGuffin that they have to protect.
Yeah.
In much how the Ring is like that. So, and then you look at Lord of the Rings. It's like arguably the most popular book in Western civilization, because it follows those tropes, and people long for that. People long to be attached to their own history.
Yeah.
And their own legacy.
Right. And that's there's obviously there's so much there's so much to be said about recurring and everlasting human nature within history, that I think it may seem pretentious to be like, oh, Star Wars is inspired by history, therefore it's good. But if you do it correctly, if you do it incredibly like George Lucas has, then it does certainly elevate it, because it instantly injects a lot of human meaning and experience and understanding into it. Whereas, if you want to talk about the sequels a bit again, we've lost all that, because it's not referencing anything really. As you said, it references itself. And when Filoni kind of became Lucas's apprentice, I think there's something about art, and this goes for writing as well, where you can study, but unfortunately there is a certain element of like, you either have it or you don't. I know a lot of guys who, as a musician, I know a lot of musicians who have really studied and tried really hard, but if there's just something if there's a certain understanding within yourself that isn't there, like, you're not gonna make that extra step. And I don't know how Filoni got his position, but he's definitely that guy. Like, he can take as many notes directly from George as he wants. He's just not gonna get it. He's not the right guy for the job. Yeah.
So the way Filoni came on board is that originally he was just an animator. He was a cartoonist, and over time he got more and more steady within the company, more power. I don't want to use the word power, because I don't think he did. It was more that George trusted him more because he'd worked with him more.
He worked his way up.
When he came on, I think he'd been the lead animator on King of the Hill and Legend of Korra.
Okay,
I know
cool.
It's weird to think that he's the King of the Hill of all things. But yeah, so then he came in for the Clone Wars, and I think there was a certain vibe that Filoni gets with George. How Filoni once explained Star Wars as basically this sandbox of different myths and legends, that none of them are really sort of like held true. It's just what people believe, and I think there's some weight to that. However, I think that Filoni fails to realize the point of those myths is that there is a moral attached to them.
Yeah.
And that is what makes them important. Whereas otherwise, it's just a story for the sake of telling a story. Like, there's no reason to tell it.
Absolutely.
I mean, another thing that sets Filoni apart from Lucas is Lucas always wanted to focus on the important parts. If it wasn't important to the story, didn't belong there.
Yeah.
So his ethos was always faster, more intense. So then when you look at Filoni, it's like the opposite. I mean, you look at the opening of Ahsoka, how she's just in that ruin that she's in. She's in there for about 10 minutes, and it's just her, and it 10 minutes of the episode, they're just walking around a room, and there's so much focus on her expressions and stuff like that. It's like, do I need to know this to understand what's going on?
Right, yeah.
Do I need to see all this? Because it's so overindulgent. It's like, I get that, it's Ahsoka is Filoni's baby. I get that, but you don't show so much favoritism to one person that you forget that the others exist, to the point where you also forget the audience exists, and you're basically taking up their time.
You're absolutely right.
The minute you start to do that, and the minute the audience perceives that, that's where you lose them. The minute they're like, "Why am I watching this?" then you've lost them.
Yeah.
Lucas never did.
Absolutely, yeah, you're totally right. And to your point that Ahsoka is Filoni's baby, that is the one thing that I think makes her not a good character in my eyes. I've written a lot of stuff, most of it total crap, but I can tell you, and probably you have too, and you should, given all your brilliant mind. But early on, writing, you think of like a cool character, you just want to protect them. You don't really think of like why they're doing what they're doing. When you're like a kid, at least when you're writing, or just even a teen. If you think of a cool guy, like someone you look up to, or just like a cool character, a hero, you just want to see them do cool stuff, and you almost get this like attachment to them that you won't let anything bad happen to them. But that's so antithetical to storytelling. You almost need to think of it backwards. Like when you think of a character, you need to think of like the first thing you need to think of is what's going to happen to them and why, you know. And it's so clear with Ahsoka, and especially it's kind of confirmed in the fact that, you know, I guess Lucas wanted her to die during Order 66, and Filoni just couldn't part with her. Like that's such pedestrian writing, you know. He doesn't let anything happen to her. She's always like in the right, you know. She is, I hate to say the word, but she is that sort of like Mary Sue character, because he doesn't let her go through anything serious or meaningful. She's always just the force for good, you know. And it's like that's just lame. I don't know. There's nothing interesting about that. And then the fact that she's so ironclad through all the events that happen, and yet like she doesn't assist. She's almost like kind of sits next to the stories, being invincible and yet like stagnant.
Invisible.
Invincible and invisible. Absolutely. And it's just stupid. Like it just throws a wrench in the whole thing. It doesn't make any amount of sense to me, her character. And then the people that go along with it are so gullible to buy all the like the inspirational speeches and stuff she does. Whenever I see her discussed, whenever I see comments about her, they treat her as if she's a real person that went through like real traumas and stuff. There was one comment that blew my mind that read it was talking about the live action Ahsoka, the Clone Wars scenes, the live action Clone Wars scenes in that Ahsoka show where they got that young actress to play Ahsoka when she's like fighting alongside Anakin. And you know, the actress was like 13 or 14 or whatever. And so the comment was basically, you know, seeing live action Ahsoka makes you realize, you know, how young she was when she saw all this death and carnage. And it's like they were almost like, you know, mourning the trauma that this real person had to go through. And it's like, guys, it's not real. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's totally wacko to me. But yeah, they treat her like it's totally crazy.
But yeah, the whole thing about Filoni, it's like when I see his writing, I don't see a writer. I see somebody playing at being a writer who's an animator, because that's what he is. And when you're writing, obviously you've got to view it as a writer. And as much as I know people like Ahsoka, and as much as people like Luke, as you know, you can have your favorite characters. There's nothing wrong with that, but you need to separate that fan mind, because when you're writing, no character is your baby. The story is your baby.
Yes.
And everything that happens has to be in service of the story. And if you're changing characters, if you're protecting them, you're not letting the story unfold in the way that it should. It's like, it's the whole thing. You know, you can go to the opposite argument with that as well. It's like a lot of would-be writers, a lot of first-time writers. The mistakes they make is that they change the characters to suit the plot. But on the same time, you need to change the plot to suit the characters.
Yeah.
Like, but obviously, they also need to be mortal. They need to be able to take hits, which Ahsoka absolutely cannot do at this point, because she's been written in a way where she's become so wise and so like powerful, like in terms of all the broader aspects of a character, that anything you put up against her, she's just gonna knock down. Because they haven't established villains well enough.
Yeah.
I mean, a hero is only as good as their villain, and you know, you can write everything so that this hero looks great. But if the villain's terrible, like most Disney era villains kind of are, your hero's not going to be looked at as anything more than just you trying to prop up a nepotistic way of writing.
Absolutely true. It's totally true. Yeah, that whole phenomenon of loving characters as if they're real is also so apart from sort of the core of what makes storytelling so impactful. It was a stupid thing I saw on Facebook yesterday. It was saying like, if you could, at the top it said, if you could save one of them, which one would it be? And it was Arthur Morgan from Red Dead 2, and then it was that dude from The Last of Us, the older guy. I don't really know The Last of Us, and so everyone in the comments was like, oh, you know, some people were saying the guy from The Last of Us, but most people were saying like, oh, Arthur Morgan, I love Arthur Morgan so much. I don't know if you've played that game. Have you played that game, Red Dead 2?
I've not played the story. I played a bit of the online, but I never really played the story.
Okay.
And then Last of Us, just never had an interest in it. Never been my cup of tea.
Well, I hope I didn't spoil it for you. Did I spoil it for you?
Nah, not
Okay,
really.
good.
I'm not someone who gets uppity about spoilers. It's just like, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think I would, if you're a gamer, I would absolutely recommend Red Dead 2. I think it's one of the best pieces of like American, I can't call it literature, but best pieces of American media that has happened in a long, honest to God. I think it's a beautiful thing. But so I would say that when I saw these people, you know, like, oh, I love Arthur so much, you know, I would definitely save him. I know it was just kind of a jokey thing, but my initial reaction was like repulsion, because his death is the most beautiful part of his character. If you eventually play the game, he goes through this incredible arc, and then his death almost represents like freedom and release. Like it needs to happen. If he survives, it's almost just like that's so much worse. So
again, it comes back to the topic of Mace Windu. If he survived, it's much worse. Like the story is much worse for it. So I'm completely on board with that. Like I said, you know, like we were talking about with Ahsoka, certain characters need to die in service of the story, and if it has to be the main character, so be it. How would Return of the Jedi look if Anakin hadn't have died?
Yeah, exactly.
It would not be anywhere near as impactful.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Wow. Well,
on that front, another interesting thing about Anakin is that, like Brutus, he indirectly commits suicide because Anakin knows when he picks the Emperor up, he's gonna fry him, and that he's not gonna survive that. So he makes that sacrifice. So he basically kills himself, much like Brutus does. Just wanted to throw that other notch in there.
That's a great point. Yeah, and the last thing I guess I'll say in closing is it's tough to know if George had direct conscious intention of some of these parallels we're making. Oftentimes I think a writer doesn't. Again, it's kind of deep in their subconscious. But there was some of you guys might know what I'm talking about. There was an interview with Steven Spielberg where they were talking about I think it was the Close Encounters. Yeah, that was his movie about aliens, right? The UFOs and everything. Yeah. Close Encounters with the Third Kind. And the interviewer, I forget what the exact parallel was, but the interviewer basically made a correlation between Steven Spielberg's parents and something that happens in the movie. I think it was the aliens actually, like making contact with him represented like his parents in some way. You have to check out the video for yourselves. But the way it hit Steven Spielberg, you know, I think the interviewer asked it in a way, assuming that was the direct conscious intention. But the way it hit Spielberg, it's like he was discovering that within himself for the first time, and he thanked the interviewer. He was basically like, "Whoa, you're absolutely right. Thank you for that." He says thank you for that because he kind of showed him the truth of some aspect of that movie that was previously not unlocked in his conscious mind. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about might not have been unlocked within George Lucas's conscious mind when he did it. Like that whole Star Wars or Death Star embryo thing. I really don't know whether or not George Lucas had the direct intention of doing that or whether or not it was subconscious, but either way, it's true. So that's what really counts here. And obviously George Lucas knows what he's doing to, you know, an incredible extent, and he does pull from classic literature, he does pull from history. But when you do that, when you take all this meaningful stuff, when you put it together, more meaning, I think, gets birthed from that in a way, whether it's intentional or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are certain things where you can definitely say, yeah, George intended to do that just because of the way that things are acted and directed. And I think when you mentioned before in your previous video about how Luke takes the deep breath, he releases the breath after he fires the proton torpedoes, I don't think that was accidental. I think a lot of the things that George did with the Death Star and that analogy you made, I think that may have been intentional because, as Lucas has said before, Luke's tale in A New Hope is very much a coming-of-age tale, and obviously Leia is his sexual awakening as well, because, you know, it's like the first time he's ever seen a woman so beautiful that he wants to act, he wants to go and save her without thinking, and that's the lust element that comes in, and that's the sign of growing up. So there are so that the whole thing of the Death Star being like meant to be like reproduction, you can there's more meat there than obviously than there isn't. So there's more in favor of it than against it, is what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely, yeah. And actually,
yeah.
on that point, Max also mentioned we were talking about making a video about it, but I'll just mention it here as well. When Luke first sees Leia, he sees her as a literal projection, and Max was talking about how when we're in our teens and we're thinking about the girl we love, we kind of project a certain woman. It's like not necessarily real, but it's like who we would want to fall in love with, who we would want to be with, in a sort of abstract and perfect sense. And Max was making the connection that when he sees her for the first time, she represents that like perfect woman who is not necessarily real. And then that's true, because when he meets her, he sees the real person, and that kind of wakes him up, and the reality of the situation is much different, and they kind of butt heads a lot. So it's like at first she's this perfect projection, everything he would want in a woman, just because he can just assume that or hope for that. And then when he meets her, it's very true to life. It's like, no, wait, this is a real person with her own with her own character traits that is not necessarily going to fill my fantasy perfectly or fit into that projection that I have of her. So I thought that was really interesting. That again, that's one of those things that maybe it was intentional as well, or maybe it was just I don't know, but yeah, either way, I think these things are true once you find them, once you root them out and kind of pull them into the light of day. But
yeah, I mean, it's the difference between a theory and a hypothesis. A theory is backed by evidence, which we have. But even if George Lucas isn't explicit about it in the way that he tells his stories or the way he gives interviews, there's enough material there that overlaps, and you can say, right, this is clearly inspired by this thing, this is clearly inspired by another.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, but I guess we'll never know for sure. All we can do is speculate and theorize. But I feel like most of the things that people speculate on are right, because George it isn't anything different. Like, he isn't some alien or anything like that. He's had all the same inspirations that we have, so he would make all those same logical connections.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, because I mean, he grew up watching Flash Gordon, as he says. How many other people grew up watching Flash Gordon and reading like literature and stuff like that? Many people. So there, like I said, there's going to be some overlap in people who have the exact same inspiration for a story, as well. So you see a lot of stories that aren't quite Star Wars, but are in what they express in their themes. Like, they're very similar, even if it's not Star Wars. Like, it doesn't look like Star Wars, but it might feel like it because it has similar themes, similar inspirations. Trying to think off the top of my head, there are certain worlds like that. I mean, a good example would be Warhammer 40k. How it has similar themes: tragedy, betrayal, all that kind of stuff. Even family to a certain point, because the Primarchs being the sons of the Emperor and stuff like that, and all the Space Marines being battle brothers. Then you've got the whole thing of the Imperium being not only inspired by Rome, but Nazi Germany and all these other empires that have risen and fallen. So there's enough material there that you can say, right, well, this is what it connects to, and this is why I like it. Because if you're into Romans, you're going to be into the Ultramarines, you're going to be into the Republic, because you understand how all that works, and there's that material there that's like similar enough, and you can sort of like see the inspiration where it's come from. But
yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Yeah. And I think the thing that sort of confirms why how this stuff is important, putting all these sort of eternal human truths into your literature, is the fact that most of the stuff that has this present in an effective way, the interest in it does last forever, as do the themes in it. Star Wars has had incredible longevity, and I don't think any franchise can really hold itself next to it in that way, in the way that it's just kept going, for better or for worse. That IP, that franchise is monumental and has lasted so long. Stuff like Warhammer 40k has had a huge fan base for so long. Anything that can stand the test of time stands the test of time for a reason, because it has relevance no matter the time, right? And it has relevance because it points to again, truths about our human nature that will never change, and that's an important thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah, you can look at Luke and Vader as an example. You know, everybody has a dispute with their father at some point, and a lot of the time that someone has a dispute with their father, it's usually whether the father wants to do the right thing by their child or by their religion.
Yeah.
Like at least in a lot of cultures that exist today, and that's exactly what Vader's torn between.
Yeah.
Well, Anakin, whatever you want to call it,
right.
he's torn between his family and his religion.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Dang. Well, this was a real treat for me, man. I think you're very smart. Yeah, I'm glad. I think you should. Do you want me to post your Twitter in the description for everyone to follow?
Feel free, man. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I mean, we can do this again at some point, because I think there's regarding all of this. I think there's a important discussion to be had around The Last Jedi, and the themes in that film, and what it tried to accomplish, even if it didn't do it very well. Ooh. I think there's a very important discussion when comparing that to other Star Wars material. So I think we could do another one of these.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's absolutely do that. Yeah, any time, just let me know, and I'll probably come to you and ask you if you want to do something else. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Go check the doc out. He's really intelligent with a lot of stuff. Again, he's able to more eloquently state a lot of the things that are kind of like locked away in my mind there. So it's almost therapeutic talking to you, because you like confirm a lot of my suspicions. Yeah, that's great. It's great.
I both appreciate and reciprocate that.
Heck yeah. All right, well, make sure to like and subscribe, guys, and we'll see you soon.